Hey, Better Babes, I'm Jonathan Van Ness, and welcome back to Getting Better. Honey, today we are talking about someone who has not had the greatest decade. In the words of Julia Roberts from My Best Friend's Wedding, things are not going well for the separation of church and state. It's actually really seriously under attack, and it's very serious. And so to talk about this today and what we can do about it, we have Brian Silva, who is the Vice President of Outreach at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Brian, hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Brian, how are you?
I'm good. It's summer, so, I'm a little happier.
Yeah, it is nice. It is, it's easier to fight for democracy when it's not freezing out.
Yes.
Which
Marching
is so
in
true.
the streets in the snow is harder.
It is. It's chilly. We have to be, but also heat stuff. So we always have to be careful when we're protesting.
Very true.
Got to prepare for the elements, honey. Okay, so yeah, I think I was trying to be like a little bit more lol in that intro when I said like someone who's not had a great decade. But when I think about it, separation in church and state, this is kind of like a random first question, but in your mind, when do you feel like it really took a turn? I have a guess, but I want to know what you think.
I think that it's been a real slow boil, but I think that, the advance of Christian nationalism and when having it pop up into the world and the changing of the Supreme Court, I think really focused people's attention on actually everything that I care about and everything that I am is protected by the separation of church and state. And so now people are kind of the fire is happening, the call is coming in the house, and we need to get on it.
Yes. I feel like I've been so lucky on this podcast to interview so many incredible historians, both on domestic policy, international policy, queer history, non-queer history. But my guess was going to be, and this is what I'm going to say, you guys can come for me if you think that I'm not correct. But in my mind, it's really fascinating when you look at Nixon, the Nixon administration in the 70s. He was pro-choice. Republicans in the early 70s and in the 60s, abortion was not this religious issue. It really was an issue of privacy, and Roe v. Wade was really decided on the individual's right to privacy in the 14th Amendment. And so then when Reagan got in, all of a sudden you had right before him, you had that Phyllis Schlafly lady, the lady who got that pie thrown in her face in that famous press conference. But yeah, I feel that was when somewhere on the Christian right, that was when they had this idea of really tying morality to a cause. And I'm sure it had happened before that, but at least I feel what I've learned, it was the 80s and HIV AIDS crisis, the Reagan administration. That's really when this white nationalist Christian right, I feel really got seated. And I feel from there, it's been that Dante's Peak slow burn. But now I feel we're at a roiling boil.
So I'm going to take it back even a little bit farther.
Fuck yes, take us back, Brian, please.
So plugging this documentary called Bad Faith, Christian Nationalism's Attack on Democracy. Everybody should watch it, all the streaming services. And what we learned from that documentary is that the actual advance of that into the public attacks on our rights was actually a Supreme Court case that said that universities that discriminate against people based on their race would lose federal funding. So you had the Bob Jones universities, the Liberty universities, all of these places in a panic because for the first time they were being attacked. The problem is that it was very hard to go out into the public world and be join us in our fight to protect racism. Nobody really liked that. And so what they actually did is they shifted and chose abortion as the issue that they were going to rally people around, because you have a lot of evangelicals in the Southern Baptist Convention when Roe v. Wade was decided actually said, this is a good decision. We fully support this. But they needed a new target. They needed a new boogeyman. And so they chose abortion. And that's when you begin to see the rise of the Christian right and them being pulled into politics, and they start going into churches and getting their lists of people and mailing them. It's a fascinating story. And that was the transition. And that's why when we talk about Christian nationalism, we really talk about this white Christian nationalism, because at its root is this desire for an elevation of white people to reclaim their place in society.
A few weeks ago, we had Katie Gaddy Tassan on, and she wrote this incredible book called Rich Girl Nation. But when we were talking about how Black women didn't have the right to vote until 1965. And so when there's this idealized version that the 50s were the best time, and then we want to return to this idea of greatness, we're not being hyperbolic when we say that this is racist. It really does have its ideas tied back in racism. But let's get into separation of church and state. We need to. That I just had to take like a little detour. Now we're going back. So separation of church and state. Let's start there. What is separation of church and state, and where do we find that in like the Constitution, or like where do we find that phraseology? Where does it come from?
Yeah. So the separation of church and state is really the only part of our government that protects the right for people to have a religion or no religion at all. In many countries, especially back in the day, you had an official religion of the country. It's part of what we were founded on, people escaping religious persecution, wanting to be able to practice their own beliefs. So in lieu of that, we had this idea, founding as a country, that we would be the first country where people could practice their own religion. We don't have the mention of God, of Jesus, of the Bible anywhere in the Constitution. It's an American original. It truly is. We were the first to do this. And so in the Constitution, it talks about the right to practice your religion and freedom from government establishing any religion. It's like the two halves of the whole that make church-state separation. And what we're seeing now is that instead of what the Constitution intended, we're seeing politicians trying to go back and impose one very narrow definition of Christianity, theirs, on us. And oftentimes it's very harmful Christianity. It's harmful for queer people, for people of color, for women, for religious minorities. And that's why we put that in the Constitution.
So what is the danger, and why is it so crucial with keeping a healthy democracy to keep religion out of politics?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's like a bit of a misnomer about church-state separation is it's not necessarily keeping religion out of politics, right? Everybody brings their values to their vote, right? Some people's values come from their religion, treat your neighbor how you want to be treated, take care of the poor, welcome the immigrant. Like those are all, biblical or other religious values. Some people have those values not based on religion. And so the idea is that when we come together, you can't just say, well, my value is more important or better because it's based on the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, whatever the case is. We have to come together and say, no matter where your values come from, we come together as a society and say, how do we create freedom without favor and equality without exception? And so that's how you're able to have a country where, for example, you might have a religion that doesn't believe in same-sex marriage. Cool. Your religion doesn't have to marry same-sex people. But in the law that protects everybody, 2 men, 2 women couldn't get married and get the same protections as everybody else. So your beliefs are protected, your right to practice your religion is protected without harming others. It's basically equality.
One thing we learned from Sister District is that there really never is like a non-election year. There's just like off-election years, but the off-election years always when Virginia votes. So in November, they're going to be having an election. That's going to be a bellwether for next year. So we really do need to be organizing, having these conversations. But what's the difference between like individual activism and grassroots organizing?
Yeah. So at its best, the two of them are complementary, right? Grassroots is like groups coming together. Individuals is an individual doing it, but you can't have a group without individuals wanting to get involved. And so, I think part of the reason why organizing is difficult, one is it's hard. It takes a lot of energy. We have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and not burning out, that we're sharing, the wealth. And especially, in this administration and in the previous administration of his, they're coming at you with 1,000 things all at once. And that's planned. The idea is keep everyone distracted, keep you worn down, also make you think that the system is broken, that it can't work, that you have no power. Because, the old religious saying, the greatest thing the devil did was to convince you that he doesn't exist. The greatest thing that the far right is trying to convince us of is that we have no power, that there's nothing that you can do. They have the judges, the Supreme Court, the Senate, the House, all of these things. But the fact of the matter is that we've been there before. And we've come back from it, and we've been able to fight back. And we've done it because individuals decided to take action and come together as grassroots groups and push back. So we just have to remember that part of the strategy is to convince us that we have no power. And the more they're trying to do that, the more you realize that they're afraid of the power that we actually do have.
One thing that I hear like the administration say, and just people on the right say, is that like to critique America is un-American. But I think critiquing America is what makes America so great in the first place, because that was one of the things that we like got more right. I mean, there was chattel slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, and a genocide of Native Americans while we established the freedom of religion clause, which Most things were not. And the patriarchy got invented then, and like colonialism, and well, not invented, but really like put upon us. But the freedom of religion part, that really was great. And so that was really cool. So I can get behind a MAGA on that part, on making religion not, or just making freedom of religion really mean something. But I just don't think that it's critiquing. I don't think it's un-American to critique the United States. I think that's what makes us so cool. That was like one of our cool things.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, what kind of job would you have if your boss said, I'm not going to give you any feedback. I'm not going to critique you on anything. Like, it's so weird to think that we would want to live in a country where we couldn't say like, hey, we could do this better. Like, this isn't going so well. This is wrong. Like, let's try to do that and to improve. And I think, you know, there's a fear in Christian nationalism that, you know, the more that we critique, the more that we try to improve, the farther we move away from what their goal is, which is their very narrow version of Christianity being imposed on all of us. Abortion is a perfect example. Overwhelmingly, this country thinks that people should have the right to choose what to do with their body when it comes to medical decisions like abortion. But yet we have a Supreme Court that overturned that, and you have dozens of states that have outright, you know, banned abortion. You know, that's not respecting what the will of the people is.
What's going on in Missouri right now, I think, is a really I mean, you had the voters of Missouri. I don't know if you guys know what's going on in Missouri, but the voters overwhelmingly approved abortion to be enshrined in their state constitution, and then their Republican legislators have systematically worked to like undo the vote, make the vote not count, and just do anything they can do to like make abortion illegal.
They just passed a law that is going to put the repeal of that on the next ballot, which means that abortion will remain illegal until that vote. And included in that bill was also an attack on healthcare for trans youth. They also repealed the increase in minimum wage that the people of Missouri passed at the ballot in November as well. And they've done this multiple times where they have overturned the will of the people. And again, that's the perfect example of it. Why are you so afraid of what the people want to have? The people want to have the freedom to believe and practice those beliefs as long as they don't harm others. That is inclusive religious freedom.
Community power. I think you were just speaking to this, and I think so many people do feel very disillusioned. They feel like they don't have power. But we have seen protests more recently. We have seen people, I think, start to find their community power. When it comes to the separation of church and state, I mean, I always think about Tequila Chongyapa, who we had on the podcast, and she taught us about like her work on like environmental activism. And what she does is she actually uses people's faith to like get them into like environmental activism. She's like so interesting. I loved her. But one thing from her episode that really stuck with me all these years is that 80% of people in the United States strongly identify like with a faith or like a religion. And the vast majority of those people are Christian, like Muslim, smaller, Judaism, smaller. So that's a huge, and of those, I feel like a lot of them would feel like separation of church and state is like maybe not great. Like a lot of them, this is their goal, is to create, and oh, that's where I was going. John Roberts, in the decision that overturns Roe, which was Dobbs in 2022, he says that abortion is not something that was deeply rooted in the traditions of the United States. And we've seen the Supreme Court say more stuff like this, that Christianity is the traditional marriage of the United States. And we've seen people on the right say that, like Donald Trump, and I mean, Paula White, who's like fucking, you know, like his spiritual advisor. And there, I mean, there's these really intense people on the right that are saying like, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's unapologetically said that we are a Christian nation, and that should be determined as our first, as our
proud Christian nationalist.
And a lot of people would say that like the separation of church and state isn't really a constitutionally guaranteed thing. Can you get into like what the argument is of those people? Like, how can they think that the separation of church and state isn't guaranteed to us based on what the Constitution says?
Yeah, you know, they love to do a lot of rewriting of history, and they love to do this whole idea that the United States was founded as a Christian nation and it was founded on Christian values. But you go back and you look at the writings of the founding fathers, you go back and you look at the actual Constitution where it says the government will not establish a religion, you know, nor take away the people's right to practice their religion. You know, that is the separation of church and state right there.
Because doesn't it say that in the First Amendment?
Yeah, the First Amendment protecting press and assembly, and you know, so it is like, you know, it was the first thing that they put into there, you know, in the Bill of Rights. And so, you know, I think it's that idea that if we continue to say a lie long enough, then like people start to to believe it. And that is what this attack is. What's interesting is that because church-state separation and religious freedom, as is defined in the Constitution, actually is the most history and tradition thing that we have, which just kind of goes to the whole, the Supreme Court loves to create these ideas and then use them when it works for them and not use them when it doesn't work for them. And that's, and I think that also helps people to just like continue to lose faith of these institutions, because it's like, well, if we're talking about that we should be protecting things that have a long history and tradition in the United States, inclusive religious freedom and church-state separation, it doesn't go much farther back than that.
I mean, I just would be remiss if I didn't mention Dr. Jackie Antonovich, who I love, and we've got to have her back on the pod. We had her on like the week that it was leaked that Dobbs was going to happen. And one thing that she taught us that I thought was so interesting is that Benjamin Franklin, in his diary, when he died, literally had abortion recipes. It's just that abortion in the 1700s looked like a midwife having like a little concoction that you would drink, because there wasn't surgical abortions. But the idea that women weren't trying to control their family planning and have family planning and control their reproductive destiny, and that isn't part of like human tradition, is insane. Like, people have been trying to like plan their families forever. Like, it's true. Like, that's just so, and for John Roberts, a fucking man, to say that it's not deeply rooted in this country's tradition, I just think is so crazy.
Well, and I think this also goes like to the real meat of why,
or maybe it was Alito. One of those two fucking guys. I'm sorry.
Is there much of a difference sometimes? I think this goes to the heart of why, the far right and Christian nationalists are so intent on attacking public education, on attacking facts and research, on trying to push vouchers to, bring kids into, religious schools where they control the curriculum, because they don't want folks to know about this. They don't want to learn about our actual history. They don't want to learn that the Constitution is like the first founding document of a nation that doesn't mention God or fealty to God or power from God. The power comes from we the people. It doesn't want to talk about how the First Amendment protects the right of religious freedom for all, including those of no religion, which is a hugely growing segment of the population, here in the US. It doesn't also want to protect all the different diversity within Christianity. You have Christians that don't believe in abortion. You have Christians that fully support abortion. You have Christians that don't believe, that there are two genders only. And you have Christians that believe that gender is fluid and it encompasses, all of our all of our people. And all of those people label themselves under the umbrella of Christianity. So, all of this research, all the facts and things like this, this is why it's so important that the government takes no side in promoting one religious view over another, or religion over no religion when it comes to passing legislation and policy, and instead just treats everybody equal, allows you to have your beliefs and live your life so long as you don't harm others.
In the communities, like in my hometown, when I think about my church, the guy that is the pastor at the father at my church, Father Patrick, shout out if you guys listen to the pod. I don't feel like our church is that type of church. But also he doesn't speak to politics. He's not going to go out and maybe I'm wrong. So mom, you can come for me, but he's not going to talk about, I don't think he's going to be necessarily political, but he's not like a white nationalist, preacher either. But I do think that more preachers and faith leaders in those kind of that have never really taken a stand on this with their flock really need to, because it's a really slippery slope. I've seen people get radicalized on the white nationalist right, and it's slow and it's insidious. It kind of reminds me how I started drinking Diet Coke again. I started following this girl on TikTok who I'm obsessed with, and she's amazing. So Sam, I'm not trying to compare you to white nationalists, okay? But I started following her, and I love her content. I think she's amazing, and she always finishes her videos with in a Diet Coke for the haters. I haven't had a diet soda in 30,000 years. After following her for a year, this one day I woke up and I was like, fuck me, you know what sounds good?
Diet Coke.
A Diet Coke. And so I just think that the slipperiness of when you start to get if your church is just, 3 blocks away from this other church and no one in these communities are having these conversations with each other, that's why people are getting radicalized in these pockets just a couple streets over, because our families, our people, our friends are not having these conversations and checking each other. In 2020, it was about in Black Lives Matter movement, I feel people were saying if you see someone being racist, if you hear someone being racist, when you're just with white people, call them out on it. Don't let it just go. I think Christians really need to do a better job of getting into their community. And this is I mean, Donald Trump is giving antichrist qualities, saying that he alone can fix things, saying that he was anointed from God. Like, these are like really problematic. I mean, some of these things are like really, 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 really like it's not Christian. So how do we work with that?
So I'm going to start off with the good news,
Yes.
because my department at Americans United, we do all of our faith organizing and programs. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Christians out there who are against Christian nationalism and actively speaking out against it and working against it. They're not always the loudest. They're not the ones with the Fox News clip or standing next to, the president in his White House, but they're out there doing the work alongside many people of faith of all kinds of religions. So, that is amazing. The second thing is I think that for folks that are, they're worried about like, well, if I say that I'm for church-state separation, kind of back to what we were talking about at the beginning, like, does that mean that like I have to somehow give up my faith? And the fact is, it's like, no, your values can come from whatever you want, whether it's from your faith tradition, whether it's from how you were raised, whether it's, from whatever. It's just about when we come into the public sphere and how we treat each other and what kind of laws and policies we pass to make sure that, everybody's getting an equal shot. Like, church-state separation is just about protecting people's equality. So it is not about taking away anyone's religion. It is the only thing in our Constitution that actually protects people's right to believe as they choose. And I think that, many on the far right have tried to twist that and say, oh, they're coming for your religion, they're coming for Christmas, they're coming for all of these things. And, the truth of the matter is we wouldn't have millions of religious people and people of faith, as part of Americans United and part of this movement to protect church-state separation if it was truly coming after, people's religion. So I think having those conversations with folks and, what they want on the far right is Christian supremacy. That's what they're going for.
Yes.
And a very specific kind of Christian supremacy. And you talk to most people of faith and they're like, I want a country where it has people of all different faiths, where people can practice and live. I'm a little worried, does this mean you're coming after my faith? And it's like, as long as you don't think that your religion has to be supreme over everybody else's and dictate how everybody else has to live, then you're part of church-state separation already. That's it.
I think for a lot of well-meaning Christians that are not white nationalist Christian supremacy people, if maybe they're listening to this and they're like, well, I don't like that I haven't really been speaking out about this. I actually do have some time to organize. I want to get involved. Americans United could like be a good place to start. Like, how would someone in their hometown like start a chapter of like Americans United for state church or for church-state separation?
Yeah. So we have tons of grassroots volunteers all across the country. So folks can go to au.org/volunteer. We've got all kinds of opportunities for faith leaders, for young people in high school and college, for everyday, folks just living in their communities. And so that's the best and first place to start. Also follow us on social media at Americans United on almost all the channels. So you can see, the work that it is that we're doing. We have ways to get involved in your community. We have ways to get involved digitally and online. So it's kind of like, what do you want to do? The most important thing, and I'll say maybe Americans United, you go and you decide it's not right for you. I'm okay with that. What I want you to do though is do something. We all have to get involved somewhere, some way, somehow with something, and just take that first step. Because again, like we were talking about earlier, what this administration and what the far right is trying to do is to convince us that we have no power. The government is broken. There's nothing that can fix it. That voting is broken. There's nothing they just keep saying the same lie over and over again. And eventually you believe it and you're like, well, then why try? And that's what they want, because that's how you wear down the resistance. And the resistance is simply the basic belief that our democracy deserves to be protected.
As Whitney and Mariah said, there
Yes.
can be miracles when you believe.
Absolutely.
No hope is frail.
If you believe in life after.
Yes, it's hard to
Come on,
kill,
Cher.
honey. So, but what does Americans United work look like? Like, if someone's listening to this, they're like, oh, I really like what you're saying, but like, what does it physically look like? And let's say that you're like, I think the revolution's happening in these streets. And maybe the revolution doesn't have to be a civil war where everything gets burned down. Like maybe we can fix it without like us becoming a like Gilead or like going through a civil war to toss the Constitution. Like, I think Americans United is a really good organization, but what does the work for someone who wants to get involved in their community, what does it look like? Is there like gorgeous meetings? Is there like, do you just have like get-togethers? Like, what do you do?
So lots of different things. So for folks that live in communities where we have chapters, we host events. We have different speakers that come through to talk about things like what Christian nationalism is, how church-state separation relates to almost everything that you care about in your life, from racial justice to LGBTQ rights to reproductive rights. We have our Summit for Religious Freedom, which happens every year in April in DC, which is a national conference, both in person and virtual. Shout out scholarships. Any students with a .edu address, you can register for free because that's the next generation. We organize protests, we organize rallies, we organize folks to testify on bills, we organize folks to write letters to the editor. We have a youth fellowship for young people in college to learn about church-state separation and how to organize in your community. So there's really like a full gambit of things that we offer, both whether you can come together in person in your community with a chapter, or if maybe you're in a place that isn't so friendly and you want to be doing it virtually from your home and online.
I love that. And I also just think like even in smaller spaces, like smaller cities, like there's a lot more of you than what you might realize.
Yeah,
and I think that
100%.
really, it feels overpowering because the right is so loud, but there is a lot of people that we don't even know about. And I think that's part of why, like, I've been thinking a lot about how like in marginalized communities, there's so much messaging that kind of like pits us against each other. Like I just see so much infighting on TikTok, like within the queer community, within already marginalized communities. And it's like, you guys, we have to stop like coming for each other, like, because we are all getting eaten right now and we need to come together. And I just think that just keeps coming up for me.
One of the reverends actually in Oklahoma City that I work with all the time gave me a really good phrase is not always an enemy, not always an ally. Like sometimes we have to find the thing that we agree on and work together, even if we don't agree on all of or some of the other things. But like, you know, we are stronger together, even if we don't agree on everything. And that is another tactic that the other side is using, is to try to convince us that, you know, oh, that person is actually so different from you and they are against you and you should be against them, because that makes us smaller and we need to be bigger.
So what is Americans United looking at right now? What are like the school board local things? Is there any like state cases? Is there Supreme Court things? Like what are you guys really focused on right now?
Yeah, I think, you know, going back to how people can get involved, one of the things is there's so much going on in your local community and in the states, and Americans United is at the forefront of fighting back on that. So late last year, we filed with our partners a lawsuit in Louisiana challenging the requirement to post one version of the 10 Commandments in every public school classroom.
And Texas just passed a law that's doing this.
And we just sued them.
Good for you.
Yeah, we're not giving up. So we've got that. Arkansas also passed the law. We're suing them there with our partners. In Oklahoma, we just had the St. Isidore case that was ruled in our favor. That was the case that was going to allow public funding of religious schools that taught and indoctrinating religion.
We were talking to Leah Lippman from Strict Scrutiny about this. And I believe, just coming from memory, that ruling was 4-4. And the only reason it was 4-4 was because Amy Barrett Coney, who's my gay brain will not allow me to say her last name right. I just will not commit to it being an M or an N. I don't want to hear about it. So whatever. But at least she did have a vertebrae, a couple backbones there, and decided to recuse herself from that case. So it let the lower court ruling stand, which said that, no, in fact, you cannot use taxpayer money to start a school that is a specific religious school. So that was a win.
Yes, that was a win. And we're going to take all the wins that we can get and build on them. We just filed a case in Quincy, Massachusetts.
That's our sister city, my hometown sister city.
Is it really?
Yeah, because I'm from Quincy, Illinois, and that's Quincy, Massachusetts. That's our literal sister city.
Well, they're in a little bit of hot water right now.
Well, Quincy and Quincy, they are just two sapphic Christian lovers, just fucking scissoring all the way to the pearly gates, honey.
Their mayor and city council decided to spend $750,000 on installing religious statues in the new police department building that they were renovating. And, you know, number one, what a waste of money when there's so many things that are needed. But the thing is that a public building, you know, these have real human impacts. Like if you're a person who has been assaulted or, you know, had something happen to you and you walk up to this place that's supposed to be like, we're here to help you, and you're Jewish or you're Hindu or you're non-religious, and all you see are these, you know, giant statues of saints and Christian, you know, icons. It's like, that just makes you feel like I don't belong here.
Or what if you're a survivor of sexual abuse from a Catholic priest in your hometown?
100%. What if you're, and going back to the 10 Commandments, people are like, well, what's the big deal? Well, number one, we weren't founded on the 10 Commandments. Like, that's, again, back to that lie they try to repeat. But when you're like a young Jewish kid or a young Muslim kid or a non-religious kid, or you're a kid who belongs to a Christian tradition that's like super progressive, and you're sitting there and every day you're looking at this, you're being reminded that your belief and your family's belief is not as good as somebody else. And if you're a parent, what we need to be asking ourselves is like, who should be teaching my kid my religious values? Is it some, random teacher or random substitute teacher that happens to be in the classroom? Religion is such a personal thing. That's what they keep arguing. So keep it personal. Like, you choose who and when and where to teach.
And
your
what about
values.
parents' rights?
And yeah, exactly. But they're only talking about the rights of the parents who want the 10 Commandments in there.
Right.
But the overwhelming majority of parents who don't, their rights are being trampled on because their kids are being forced to go and sit in a classroom and look at that and think that that's the right way to be.
Yes.
And that's not okay.
And I think what my message is that I just want people to know about is like, I'm trying to figure out like, what's the line that I walk to get those undecided people that don't think that this is their fight into it. Like, I was talking to a family member and I jumped down her throat about gender issues because she said something that pissed me off. And I really jumped down her throat about it. And I feel like I didn't move her at all. And I'm disappointed about it. But I'm concerned that on our side, sometimes like we get so upset and rightfully so, because I'm one of the people, like I am cussing people out in the comments like consistently. So I'm not saying that I've like figured this out, but I do want us to be inclusive. I want us to be like a welcoming place for people to land, like where we're not policing each other's words so much that like we seem like we're not inviting or like we're not. I don't know if that resonates for you at all, but what do you think we need to do to like build this coalition? And also like, what can we say to people that just don't see this as an issue? That they're like, well, I'm living my life. I'm going to school. I'm too busy to deal with this, or I'm raising my kids. I'm too busy. Like, I just am not going to see Christianity as a threat. But I think that's also what I want to be clear about. It's not the Christianity as the threat. It's the white nationalism. It's the white Christian nationalism that's the threat. And those are not the same things.
Correct. Last summer I was visiting a family member, and we were sitting in the car while my husband and was inside grabbing some stuff from the store. And she says to me, I don't really get this pronouns thing. And I'm like, oh God, where are we going? And what I always try to remind myself at that moment is stay curious. And so I pulled myself together and I said, tell me more. And what she explained was that she struggles with remembering people's pronouns. She's like 85 years old. Like, this is not what she grew up with. And so she's always afraid to say the wrong thing. So she says nothing. And I was like, oh, that's not anti-anything. She's actually wants to do the right thing, but she's scared that she's going to say the wrong thing. She'll be attacked. And I was like, thank goodness I asked a question instead. And I think if we could remain more curious and ask people, like when they say something that sounds off base, or like, tell me more, like, what makes you feel that way? Or like, what is the experience? I think that opens up a lot of space for us to actually have meaningful conversations. I also think it's important that we have to realize that just because we don't agree on everything doesn't mean we can't agree and work together on some things. Church-state separation, we at Americans United, we are bipartisan. We have people left, right, center, Democrat, Republican, independent, because it is a democratic value. It's like voting. Like, everybody should believe in voting. Everybody should believe that no one religion should dictate our laws, or, and I think that by giving people the space to like learn and to grow and to come in with us, that is one of the most important things that we can do. I also understand that for some people, those interactions can feel very harmful and triggering. So it's also fine if that's not for you. Like, it's okay if you're like, I'm not at a place where I can do that, so I'm not going to engage. But for those of us who feel like we can, we really need to like put ourselves out there. I worked on the marriage equality movement for over a decade. And I mean, I was talking with faith leaders and Republicans and others who absolutely did not believe in it. And over the course of 10 years, I mean, we're not talking like a few days, we moved people. And now you have like 70% support for like same-sex marriage here and here. And we have to be willing to meet people where they're at and invite them to walk over with us. We can't just stand far away from them and say, well, until you believe everything that I believe, I'm not willing to talk to you, engage with you, or work with you in any capacity. Like, it just doesn't work.
I think one, like Handmaid's Tale, what a run. Okay. But I think one thing, it's like, I feel like sometimes people on the left, it's like, oh, we're like 3 steps away from Gilead. And then I feel like that kind of makes like undecided people feel like you're being dramatic, or they're like, well, my life hasn't shifted that terribly much, even though I do think that becomes increasingly difficult when we're watching like ICE, rip up families on the street and target people trying to go to their court appointments and stuff. But for people that just think that that's dramatic or far-fetched, what does American United think are like the biggest risks, or like what could the United States look like in say 5 or 10 years if we don't get behind a cause like Americans United?
Yeah, I think that you'll start to see a huge amount of funding shift away from public schools that are open to all kids, that are supposed to, treat everybody equally, and moving into, private and publicly funded religious schools where they can turn away queer kids, turn away disabled kids, turn away like they used to before that Supreme Court case, turn away kids of color, and starting to grow a generation that thinks that our laws should be based on one unique form of Christianity. I think you could see the stripping away of queer rights. The Southern Baptists recently just announced that their church and denomination is going to work to try to overturn the Obergefell ruling. And listen, again, you can believe whatever you want, but you shouldn't be able to go after and take away other people's rights, because your particular religious belief, says that. So I think queer people should be really concerned. I think we've already seen the Dobbs decision. I think you could see more attacks on, medical abortion through medication, through giving access to people in states where it's illegal, coming after things like contraception. There's already a case in Texas to try to overturn insurances having to cover PrEP,
yes,
and other, HIV medications. That's
Braidwood management.
Yes. So I think all of those things, and that's part of what we try to do to Americans United, is make people understand and see that church-state separation literally touches every single thing that you care about, because almost, so many of the laws and things that are used to attack our communities, what people say is like, well, that's my sincerely held religious belief. You are allowed to have that. You are not allowed to use that as a hammer to injure or harm other people in the community, in the public space.
Can you spell out, like, in conversation, if you interact with someone, if you find a Kim Reynolds in your life and you're like, oh, okay, they're saying this thing, how can you explain to them that like that is injuring someone else, like preventing someone from getting married or preventing someone from having reproductive health care, especially with the abortion piece, because they're like, stop calling reproductive health care that, it's murder. Like, how can we get through to these people? Or is it that other thing I say where it's like you can't get through to those people, you just have to get through to the people who don't think that this is an issue?
So it's both and. There's always going to be people.
I love a non-binary answer. Okay, just first of all, that is like so non-binary of us, and I love that. Yes.
So there is always going to be people that we can't reach. And it's important not to spend our time there, because like you were talking about, like it can just drain the life out of you. We need to talk to the people who are actually open to listening to us. And I think one of the things that is really important with, especially for people of faith, is to talk about, like we were saying, this is not about asking you to change your personal beliefs. You can continue to believe that abortion is wrong. You can continue to try to educate people on why they shouldn't have an abortion, or, present, other options. That is the free exchange of ideas. What you can't do is say, I'm not going to do that work. I'm just going to force a law on you that says you can't have control over your body and what you want to choose.
Because I feel better about that.
Because yes. And I think for a lot of people it is, and that's on both sides, right? Like we have to be okay with the fact that people are not going to necessarily agree with us on the issue outcome, but they can agree with us on it that but we shouldn't put that into law. And that's where we get a lot of folks, who don't necessarily believe how, like, maybe I personally believe. Like, I've been, married to my husband. We've been together for over 20 years. And, I know people who don't think that marriage equality should be the law of the land. But what they don't think is that just because they believe that that's the law that should be passed. Like, that's how we passed the abortion protections in Missouri. It wasn't because we changed a whole bunch of Missourians' mind that, abortion is right and everybody should, access it and utilize it. There's a lot of people who still firmly believe that abortion is wrong, but they also said, it's not my job to tell you what to do with your body. And I think having those conversations and giving people the comfort that, like, you can still have your beliefs, you just can't impose them on others through law, that opens up a window of conversation for a lot of people. Because if you are a person of faith, your faith is deeply rooted. It's how you choose to live your life. It might be how you choose to raise your kids, how you choose to, if it's well, it's hopefully how you choose to treat your neighbor. And the far right and Christian nationalists try to create this boogeyman of, like, we're trying to take that from you. We're trying to take your religion and take your belief system away from you. And not at all. We're just saying that when it comes to making decisions about the whole, the community, the neighborhood, the state, the country, we need to do things that protect freedom without favor and equality without exception. That's it.
I love that phrase. Is that like an Americans United phrase?
It might be our tagline.
It is. I love that.
It might be on the shirt.
That's what I thought. But I was like, too bad that's not in the Constitution, because that's hot.
Right?
Yeah, I love that phrase.
I'm telling you.
That's really good.
It's on a shirt. You can buy it at au.org/store.
Yes, get it right now. I love your top. It's so cute. But I think that's one thing that's how kind of I was bringing up Tequila Chongyapa's work earlier. And I loved what you were saying, like, you gotta pick something. If it's not Americans United, that's fine. But you gotta pick something, because the amount of people, like, when I was a little kid, I definitely was like, abortion is murder, pro-life this, pro-life that. Like, I was such a good little foot soldier for White Christian Nationalists, because that, I saw it at school. I saw it in my church community. I saw it in all sorts of different places. Mm-hmm. So I was all up in that soup, and it's a very slippery slope. And once I realized that I was queer, which was pretty young, I was like, oh, like I started seeing a lot of the cracks. All of this can feel very intimidating. How can someone start to shift their mindset to get in this fight?
So I think one of the first things is stop thinking you're going to do something wrong. We think about, like, even just like reaching out and talking to people. What's one of the most intimidating things? Like, I'm going to say the wrong thing, or, whatever. If you're doing something is better than doing nothing. And that might mean that you do something and you learn along the way that, like, oh, I could do it better next time, or more effective next time, or with somebody next time. But that inability to, like, take that first step, I think, is the hardest thing for people, because they're worried that, whatever worry is, don't worry. Do something and start there, and then build on top of that. But, again, it's that worry they're going to do the wrong thing, or that nothing's going to be effective, or I'm just one person. And we can't have a grassroots movement. We can't have a national movement without individual people standing up and doing something.
There is, like, we have to match the energy. Yeah. And the Christian nationalist movement is growing in energy. They have more voices that are louder, that have gotten to the highest levels of government. And I do think that for people that want separation of church and state, we have to be putting this content out. We have to be talking about this in our daily lives. So it's not only online, it is in real life. And this idea that, like, for me, I think with our listeners, because so many of our listeners are women, and they're between like 18 and like in their 40s. Mm-hmm. And I do think that it's abortion, and it's reproductive health care that will be the thing that will get you involved, because unfortunately so many people don't get involved in these things until it directly impacts their life. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that people could be more empathetic and could be bothered to give a shit if it didn't directly impact their life. But I just want women to know, like, you can meet someone, you can end up in an abusive relationship, you can end up, like, really not having reproductive health care. Your life can be permanently impacted, and not only from abusive relationships and, like, bad faith men, bad faith relationships that can, like, get you tied down with, like, a pregnancy that they are never going to help you with, they are never going to help you take care of, but you can die. There are women in the United States that have been kept on life support against their will because they are pregnant. There has 100%. Been such a huge gray area created from these anti-abortion laws that, like, this is your life, this is your health care, you guys, like, and that so many women think, well, it's just states' rights. The fact that women are having to get smuggled across state lines, to get abortions in secret so that they can live their lives. It is abhorrent that this is happening and more people aren't talking about it and aren't getting off the fight. But because human nature is such that people oftentimes won't get involved until it impacts them, nobody with a uterus that is capable of getting pregnant is very far away from this impacting their life in a really negative way. And I just want people to know that that should be reason enough for you to get in this fight.
And I was just going to say, like, also this attack on public education and trying to infuse Christian nationalism and religion into curriculum and all these things, like, those are the schools your kids are going to go to. That's how your kids are going to, be learning. Those are the school boards that are being elected and, kicking trans kids out of sports and, telling, you can't use the pronouns for students and all of these things. So there is so much that affects like your everyday life within this. One good news alert is they are louder and they have more money, but they are still not the majority of us. And I think that is, I think finding hope in places, that's something that's hopeful for me, is that we still have the majority of people. Maybe they're not taking action yet, like that's what we're trying to move towards, but they still don't think that we should be a Christian nationalist nation. And we need to hold on to that. We need to grow that. And we need to get those folks louder.
What do you think are myths about like grassroots organizing that we need to debunk? That it's like, I think I know one. That it's like not fun. It's like laborsome. It's burdensome. It's like not, like it can look so many different ways.
Yeah. Trick question. Have you ever been to a pride parade?
I love, yes.
That is grassroots organizing. That is activism, being out and loud and proud and like wearing fun t-shirts and collecting stickers and painting your face. Like that's grassroots activism. Yeah, there's other stuff that's like, labor intensive, like going to meetings and maybe testifying or like writing a letter to your local newspaper. But there's lots of fun stuff that you can do to help, raise awareness about things. We host movie screenings all the time. I mentioned the Bad Faith documentary. There's another one called God and Country. Getting a bunch of friends together and like watching a movie with some popcorn, make a cocktail or a non-alcoholic cocktail. And like then afterwards be like, that was some scary shit. And what do we think about that? We hosted a bunch of those all across the country. So there's lots of fun ways. I don't, want to sell short, like, yeah, there is some hard, blood, sweat and tears work that has to happen, but it doesn't all have to be like that. And the other thing too, is like when you meet that community of people that cares about, this issue, it's another group of people that you connect with, that, building like real human in-person connections with people. And especially today, like in the world of social media, that has built some, a very specific kind of connection that's great. But sometimes we've lost the ability to come together like in person with people. And I think grassroots organizing and coming together, that can really help to overcome that too.
In your work, your work has been like decades long. You've been on the front lines of so many important conversations in your work with Americans United, which I love, and outside of it. What is like a story of like hope or change or like resilience that like keeps you doing this work when you feel overwhelmed and like things are not changing?
I think one of the most recent ones for me is the work that we were able to support in Missouri when they did pass the abortion ballot measure. Before that, a few years before that, Americans United filed a lawsuit with our partners to overturn the state's abortion ban because of the violation of separation of church and state. If you check out the video online of the legislators, they're like, this is God's law. This is God said to do this. Like they're literally saying this and putting it like into the legislation. And, I think a lot of people thought it was a real long shot. And we were able to build a coalition of like 50 or 60 organizations on the ground, do training, talk about, why church-state separation and abortion are connected. And, eventually those groups on the ground were able to come together and they put forth this ballot measure. And one of the stories I heard from the folks that were doing canvassing, like door knocking, was somebody came to, one of the volunteers went to a door and said, like, hey, I'm here to talk about, the ballot measure. And like, what do you think? And the person's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna vote to protect abortion rights because I saw that lawsuit that you filed, and I read about that, and I was like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. And that to me was like one person in rural Missouri who heard the message and changed their mind and was able to come out and support actually making that legislative change that we want to have, that one person, one story at a time. And that's what grassroots organizing is. It's changing one person at a time. And each of us doing that collectively is going to shift everything.
So if you're listening and you're like, honey, I'm overwhelmed, like with my family, my job, whatever, like I don't have time to go to a protest or a barbecue or like really do this, but guess what? $35. If you got 35,
you got 35.
Would love that. If you're listening to this and you're like, honey, I got 35, that'll make me feel a little bit better. We'll scratch that itch, honey. I think we can put that link on the on the episode description.
Great.
But if you do want more community, we are currently in the middle of an epidemic of loneliness.
Yeah.
And I think that part of what is so fun about church is that like there is community and there's like a donut hour and you just get to like meet people afterwards. So do that with Americans United. Start a chapter. How many people do you need to get involved to like start a chapter in your town?
Just need one to start, and then we'll help with supporting growing a network or a group of folks, to be able to do that. We also have ways that folks can do that online. Like maybe you don't want to do it in person, but you want to connect with people online. We've got both of those.
I love both and, honey.
Yes.
So you can do it in person. You can do it online. You can kind of just do like a one and done donation, but you can also, because I mean, you guys, as someone who really knows this, time can sometimes be like way more valuable than $35. So if you don't got $35, but you got like an hour or two a week, please show up for Americans United. You guys are doing such good work, Brian. Thank you so much for coming on Getting Better. We appreciate your time. We love you so much. Are you super active on any socials?
I am not, but you can follow Americans United at Americans United on all the socials.
Where do you think they're like the most fun and engaging?
I love our Insta.
Okay,
our
Insta's
great. Yeah, TikTok is growing, but Insta's slaying.
Okay, so definitely get on Insta, but also maybe get on the TikTok. Support them on both.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we love the metadata.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you.